The scent of old paper and dust hangs heavy in the attic. My fingers brush against the worn leather cover of a journal, nestled beside a small, tarnished silver locket. Opening it, a faded photograph slips out. A young woman with eyes holding galaxies of unshed tears, standing before a grand skeletal piano in a ruined room. Behind her, through the shattered windows, a city smolders. This is Eleanor. Her story, etched in ink, stained with time and grief, is one I must tell. It is a story not of battles fought by armies, but of a war waged within two hearts, a fragile love crushed beneath the relentless boot heel of history. London, in that final, frantic August of 1939, thrummed with a deceptive energy. Sunshine, sharp and golden, glanced off the polished bonnets of black cabs and the windows of department stores still displaying frivolous luxuries. It was in this suspended reality that James Alden first saw Eleanor Vance. He was an architect, his mind usually occupied with lines, angles, and the promise of permanence in stone and steel. She was a pianist, her soul seemingly woven from the very notes she coaxed from the keys. He encountered her not in some grand concert hall, but in the dusty sanctuary of St. Clement's Church, where she volunteered to play during the lunch hour recitals organized to soothe frayed nerves. He had slipped in, seeking refuge from a contentious meeting about reinforcing city structures, his head pounding. Then her music began. Not a grand sonata, but a simple, melancholic Chopin nocturne. It flowed through the cool, dim air of the ancient church, washing over the handful of listeners like a balm. James found himself transfixed, not just by the skill, but by the profound sorrow and resilience emanating from the slight figure at the piano. Sunlight, filtered through stained glass depicting St. George, fell across her dark hair and the pale, intense concentration of her profile. In that moment, amidst the gathering storm clouds of conflict, James felt an unexpected, terrifyingly deep sense of peace and connection. Their courtship unfolded like a precious stolen thing. Walks along the embankment as the Thames flowed grey and implacable beneath them. The first autumn leaves beginning to crisp at the edges. Shared silence in the reading room of the British Museum, surrounded by the silent testament of civilizations that had also known strife and decay. Furtive kisses in the blacked-out doorway of her Bloomsbury flat after an evening listening to crackling news reports on the wireless, the announcer's voice tight with controlled dread. He designed buildings in his sketchbook, hopeful, airy structures filled with light, meant for a future he desperately wanted to believe in. She practiced scales and arpeggios, the music a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. They spoke little of the war directly. It was the ever-present shadow, the third entity in the room. Instead, they spoke of the books they loved, the music that moved them, the small, perfect details of the world they cherished. Their love was a secret garden, walled against the coming winter, nurtured with stolen moments and desperate hope. The relentless aerial assaults shattered London, and with it, the fragile illusion of safety. The night skies became canvases of terror, painted with the garish orange and red of exploding incendiaries. The relentless drone of aircraft engines and the shattering symphony of anti-aircraft fire. Darkness was no longer peaceful. It was a suffocating blanket under which destruction rained from above. James, deemed essential for reconstruction and planning, remained in London, his work shifting from creation to salvage, from blueprints of future libraries to assessments of bombed-out ruins. The clean lines of his pre-war designs gave way to charcoal sketches of fractured facades, piles of rubble where homes once stood, the stark geometry of loss. His hands, once used to trace elegant curves, now grew calloused, shifting debris, searching for survivors or performing the grim, final task of recovery. Eleanor's world contracted. Her beloved piano at St. Clement's was silenced when a near miss cracked the church's vaulted ceiling and showered the instrument with plaster and glass. She joined the women's voluntary services, driving ambulances through streets turned into obstacle courses of rubble and twisted metal. The smell of cordite, burning wood, and something darker, metallic and cloying, the scent of ruin, replaced the linseed oil and lavender. Her hands, meant for coaxing beauty from ivory keys, now gripped a steering wheel slick with rain and sweat, navigated by the hellish illumination of fires raging unchecked. They still met, but the stolen moments were stained with exhaustion and trauma. Their embraces were tighter, more desperate, clinging to each other as anchors in a world adrift. Words became harder. The shared silences were no longer comfortable, but heavy with the unspoken horrors they both carried. They wrote letters, long, aching missives filled with mundane details and profound longing, when his duties took him to other battered cities for assessments, or when the chaos kept them apart for days. The letters were lifelines, tangible proof that the other still existed, still breathed, still remembered the taste of love before the world tasted ash. They spoke of after the war, a mythical time that shimmered like a mirage on the horizon, growing fainter with each passing month of destruction. Their love remained, a deep, bruised thing, but the relentless pressure of the conflict was causing a slow, agonizing fracture in their shared dream. Orders came for James. His expertise was needed urgently, not in rebuilding London, but in assessing the structural integrity of vital ports and industrial cities along the East Coast, places bearing the brunt of intensified hostilities. The secrecy surrounding his movements deepened. Letters became infrequent, then ceased altogether. The official notification was terse. Temporary reassignment, communication restricted, duration unknown. The silence that followed was a void more profound than any caused by the blackout. Eleanor waited. Each day, she scanned the casualty lists published in the newspapers, her heart stopping at every surname beginning with A. The dread was a physical weight in her chest, a constant companion. She played piano again, finally, on an old upright donated to the WWII canteen. The music was different now, darker, more dissonant, threaded through with a sorrow that resonated in the weary faces of the soldiers and civilians who paused to listen. Her fingers found solace in the mournful strains of Rachmaninoff, the complex grief of late Beethoven. She played for James, sending her love and fear and desperate hope out into the ether with every note, praying somehow it would reach him. She reread his old letters until the paper grew soft at the creases, tracing the familiar loops of his handwriting, clinging to the memory of his voice, his touch, the specific way he said her name. Months bled into a year. London endured, scarred but stubborn. The raids lessened, but the damage was done, etched into the city's face and the hearts of its people. Eleanor moved through her duties with a mechanical efficiency, a specter of the vibrant woman James had known. Her laughter, once a bright, clear sound, was rare and brief. Her eyes, once holding galaxies, now often held only a deep, weary emptiness. The hope for after the war began to curdle into a quiet, devastating resignation. The news, when it finally came, arrived not with a telegram bearing the dreaded official stamp, but with a visit. A colleague of James's, a man named Davies, grey-faced and holding his hat awkwardly in his hands, stood on Eleanor's doorstep one rain-lashed November afternoon. He didn't need to speak. The truth was etched into the profound sorrow and apology in his eyes. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice. James had been in Hull, assessing damage to the docks after a particularly devastating raid several months prior. They were working in a warehouse deemed structurally unsound but critical for supplies. James, ever meticulous, had insisted on one final check of the upper level. The colleague described the sound, a low groan, like a dying beast, then the terrifying rumble as a section of the compromised floor, weakened further by a delayed collapse mechanism triggered by vibrations from a passing convoy, gave way. James and two others were buried instantly under tons of concrete, steel, and stored machinery. Rescue attempts were frantic but hopeless. The rubble was too unstable, the damage too complete. The recovery of bodies took weeks, hampered by further raids and the sheer dangerous instability of the site. By the time they reached them, identification was difficult. James Alden was listed as missing, presumed killed. There was no body to send home, no grave to visit. Only the certainty of his absence, confirmed by a man who had witnessed the dust settle. Eleanor did not scream. She did not collapse. She stood perfectly still in her small, shabby sitting room, the rain streaking the window like tears on a dirty pane. She looked past Davies, past the room, past the rain-slicked street outside. She looked into the abyss that had just opened within her. The silence that followed Davies's halting explanation was absolute, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof. The fragile structure of hope she had maintained, the dream of after the war, crumbled as finally and completely as the warehouse floor in Hull. James was gone. Not heroically in a dramatic battle, but in a mundane, brutal accident of war. Buried under the ruins, he had dedicated his life to understanding and preventing. There was no farewell, no last touch, no final word. Only the echo of falling masonry and the endless, empty silence. I closed the journal. Eleanor never played the piano professionally again. She lived a long life, a quiet life of service, surrounded by music she taught to children, but never again played with the fire and sorrow that had marked her during those years. She wore the locket, containing that single photograph of her standing before the ruined piano at St. Clement's, until the day she died. She never married. How could she? Her heart was buried somewhere beneath the unyielding rubble of a Hull warehouse, alongside the man who had seen beauty in lines and heard eternity in her music. His absence became her permanent landscape, a silent, echoing ruin far more desolate than any bombed street. The love story of James and Eleanor wasn't extinguished by a single bomb or bullet. It was suffocated slowly, relentlessly, by the pervasive, crushing weight of the conflict itself. Outside the attic window, modern London buzzes, a city rebuilt, vibrant, scarred but alive. The war is history now, a chapter in textbooks. But for Eleanor Vance, the war never ended. It ended James, and with him, the future they had sketched in hopeful lines and dreamed in fragile melodies. Their tragedy wasn't marked by ideologies or specific regimes, but by the simple, brutal arithmetic of war. The subtraction of a life, the erasure of a future, the reduction of a profound love, to ashes scattered on the wind and lost amidst the greater, indifferent ruin. The final, devastating note of their symphony was the silence of a voice never heard again, the silence of a piano forever stilled, the silence of an unmarked grave beneath a forgotten pile of rubble. Ashes indeed, carried on the indifferent air. If this story stirred something in you, like, share, subscribe, because some stories don't end, they echo.